Top 10 Most Bulletproof Pickup Engines Ever Made. Why is that rusty old farm truck from the 1980s still pulling trailers while your buddy's shiny new pickup is already on a tow truck? Here's the secret. Some engines weren't just built. They were forged to survive. We're talking about motors so tough, so brutally overbuilt, they didn't chase horsepower crowns. They earned something rarer: respect. These weren't made to meet emissions or warranties. They were made to fire up in a snowstorm haul all day and do it again tomorrow with zero drama. These are the legends. The ironclad straight sixes. The diesel beasts. The engines that became myth in garages, job sites, and midnight repair tales. Today on Muscle Car Masters, we're counting down the top 10 most bulletproof pickup truck engines of all time. Picked by real fans. Backed by stories from the dirt and the highway. Still driving one that won't quit. Drop your story in the comments. Smash that like button if your truck ever outlived expectations. Ford 300 Inline 6. It didn't have the roar of a big block or the fancy fuel injection of modern mills. But the Ford 300 Inline 6 didn't care. It wasn't built for glory. It was built to outlive you, your neighbor, and probably the guy who invented fuel injection. Born with an iron block, a forged crankshaft, and the attitude of a farm mule, the 306 didn't know how to quit. This engine became the backbone of America's F-Series trucks from the mid-60s through the 90s. Farmers, plumbers, and grandpas trusted it. Why? Because it didn't just run. It survived. One fan said he drove it until the core of the spark plugs melted, and it still ran. Another daily drove it to collect barnwood for 14 years. Cold starts first crank. Repairs, just plugs points and oil changes. With a compression ratio of 8.8 to 1 and a red line around 4,000 RPM, it wasn't high-strung. But it never had to be. And if you think that's just nostalgia talking, remember this. It earned 54% of real fan votes, absolutely crushing the competition. The Ford 300 didn't need turbochargers or tech. It needed oil patience and maybe a busted hose or two just to prove a point. That's why it's not just a good engine. It's the king of longevity. And if you ever spot one still running out in the fields or on a ranch road, don't be surprised. That's just the 300 doing what it was born to do. Outlive the truck it came in. Chevy 350 small block. There's a reason the Chevy 350 became America's most swapped and most rebuilt engine. With 5.7 liters of cast iron block reliability, a simple push-rod valve train and horsepower ranging from 145 to 370, depending on trim, this small block V8 found its way into everything. From Camaros and C10s to motorhomes and boats. And that's exactly why fans still voted it into our top 3 with 21%. Its real strength parts. There are more aftermarket upgrades, rebuild kits, and junkyard spares for the 350 than any engine in history. You break it, you fix it. Cheap, fast, anywhere. But not every 350 was immortal. The early carbureted flat tappet versions were notorious for wearing out cams and lifters, especially after 100,000 miles. One fan put it this way: early flat tappets often wore down the camshaft, but once fuel injection came along, they outlasted their owners. Once fuel injection and better metallurgy showed up in the late 80s, the 350 earned its bulletproof badge. These later models routinely hit 250,000 plus miles with only basic maintenance: plugs, belts, oil. It wasn't always the toughest, but it was the most fixable. And that's why the 350 never really died. It just kept coming back stronger, cleaner, and louder. If reliability means being ready for round 2, 3, or even 4, then the Chevy 350 is the heavyweight champ of rebuilds. Chrysler Slant 6, 225. If engines had a nuclear apocalypse, the Chrysler Slant 6 would be the only one crawling out of the rubble. Officially, a 3.7-liter inline-6 tilted at 30 degrees, the Slant 6 looked odd, sounded odd, and refused to die. Designed in 1960 and still haunting junkyards and farm trucks decades later, it wasn't just tough. It was unkillable. In our community, poll 15% of real fans voted the Slant 6 as one of the most bulletproof pickup engines of all time. And they're not wrong. Some say Chrysler engineers didn't build this in Detroit. They built it in a forgotten aerospace facility. Because this thing ran like a spaceship engine disguised in a Dodge Dart. Cast iron block forged steel crankshaft, oversized water jackets, and enough piston wall clearance to run dry and not seize. This was over-engineering in the best way. Its 8.4 to 1 compression ratio and redline under 5,000 RPM kept things calm and indestructible. One fan's story says it all. My dad told me to blow it up. We had a replacement ready. I tried everything. Donuts over revs, no oil. It never died. With modest factory numbers around 145 horsepower and 215 pound-feet of torque, it didn't win races, but it won wars. It ran with cracked heads, broken mounts, even with missing belts. Slant 6s were known to limp home with 0 water pumps and fan belts coasting on pure mechanical spite. Forget performance. This was mechanical immortality. It wasn't built to thrill. It was built to survive. Just like a cockroach, only louder. Toyota 22R. It wasn't big. It wasn't powerful. But 10% of real fans still voted the Toyota 22R as one of the most bulletproof pickup truck engines ever built, and they had good reason. With a displacement of 2.4 liters, single overhead cam design, and a legendary dual-row timing chain. This little 4-cylinder was the David in a world of V8 Goliaths. What the 22R lacked in raw horsepower, it made up for in sheer willpower. Factory rated at around 100 horsepower and 130 pound-feet of torque, it wasn't winning drag races. But it always got you home. And sometimes it got you home without belts, without fans, or even without coolant. One fan nailed it with this story. My 4Runner threw the fan belt. As long as I was running over 40 miles per hour, the airflow kept the engine cool enough. I drove it over 100 miles with no belts on the engine. It just kept going. The 22R's secret oversized bearings, overbuilt internals, and a simple carbureted design that anyone with a wrench and a weekend could maintain. Compression sat around 9.0 to 9.5 to 1, and redline reached a humble 5,500 RPM. Just enough to get you out of trouble and back home. It was built for farmers off-roaders and people who forgot oil changes. Some say the engineers didn't design this engine in a lab, but summoned it during a Zen meditation in the mountains of Japan, where diesel fumes and dragon myths became one. Even today, you'll find these engines running strong after 350,000 miles or more, often outlasting the body of the truck itself. Quiet, reliable, and relentless. The 22R wasn't flashy. It was forever. Cummins, 5.9 liter, 12 valve. Some engines were born in factories. This one, it feels like it was forged in a blacksmith shop somewhere deep in the Rockies. The Cummins 5.9-liter 12-valve wasn't just an engine, it was a revolution. With its cast-iron block and head-direct mechanical fuel injection and a fixed-geometry turbocharger, it delivered 160 to 215 horsepower and a mountain-moving 400 to 440 pound-feet of torque, depending on the year. A long-stroke inline-six layout gave it bulletproof durability and effortless low-end grunt. Originally built for industrial and agricultural use, it snuck its way into Dodge trucks, starting in 1989, most notably the Dodge D250 and W250, and nothing's been the same since. It didn't care about emissions. It didn't care about comfort. It cared about one thing: getting the job done no matter how brutal the conditions. Diesel mechanics still talk about it like folklore. How it could outlast the truck it came in, or how it ran better the harder you worked it. One fan put it best: the ultimate, but not a light-duty engine. And that's the thing. This beast wasn't designed for your everyday grocery run. It was for pulling hay trailers up muddy inclines, hauling lumber through snowy hills, and surviving teenage abuse on the farm. That's exactly why so many of our real fans demanded we include this beast in the top 10 anyway. What about you? Drop a comment with the engine you think deserves to make it into part 2. Chevy 292 Inline 6. Now, here's one they don't teach you about in the history books, but ask any old-school farmhand or delivery driver, and they'll nod with a smirk. The Chevy 292 wasn't glamorous. It didn't rev like a small block, didn't sound like a big block, but it pulled like a freight train on caffeine. This 4.8-liter straight six was built for hard labor. With its extra long stroke and beefy 7 main bearings, it made up to 165 horsepower. But more importantly, it cranked out over 280 pound-feet of torque, down low, where trucks actually work. It had taller deck height than the 250 heavier-duty internals, and a reputation for running forever, with just oil gas and a little respect. Compression ratio was a workhorse-friendly 8.0 to 1, with a red line barely cracking 4,000 RPM. Perfect for pulling, not racing. Fans say it was Chevy's quiet answer to Ford's 300. Both engines came from the same playbook. Simple design, cast iron everything, and torque you could measure in fence posts pulled. You didn't see many of them at drag strips, but head out to the back roads of Missouri, the rural delivery routes of Kansas, or the dairy farms in upstate New York, and chances are you'll still catch an old C10 or step van with a 292 under the hood, quietly outliving the flashier machines that replaced it. Dodge 318 LA V8. Some engines were built to impress. Others were built to endure. The 318 LA wasn't out for trophies. It was out to get the job done and then do it again the next morning. And for decades, it did exactly that. Introduced in 1967, this 5.2-liter LA Series small block came with a bore of 3.91 inches and a stroke of 3.31 inches, pushing out around 230 horsepower and up to 340 pound-feet of torque in later tuned versions. It used hydraulic lifters, a cast-iron block, and heads, and a 2-barrel or 4-barrel carb setup depending on the year and trim. The magic of the 318 wasn't just its numbers. It was how long those numbers held up. Farmers, fleet operators, and stubborn uncles across America ran these things until the paint peeled off the valve covers. It was the kind of engine you'd swear was forged not in Detroit, but somewhere deep in a steel mill where engines were seasoned like cast-iron skillets and blessed by old Mopar gods. One fan said it best. Ko 318s, che hang chuk num, troi chi thay nhat. You'd find them in everything from Dodge D100 pickups to Plymouth Valeras hauling feed towing trailers, or just refusing to die in small towns from Montana to Alabama. Some say the 318 wasn't fast. Maybe not, but it was forever. Ford 352 FE V8. Some engines roar, others rumble. But the 352 FE, it hummed along like a steel ox pulling a plow at sunrise. Steady, loyal, and absolutely unbothered. First launched in 1958 as part of Ford's legendary FE series, the 5.8-liter big block wasn't built for glory laps. It was built for hard miles and long hauls. With a bore of 4.00 inches and a stroke of 3.50 inches, it cranked out around 208 to 300 horsepower, depending on setup and torque numbers north of 380 pound-feet in later versions. But don't get lost in the stats. The real power of the 352 was its stubborn refusal to quit. With a compression ratio reaching up to 9.6 to 1 and redline around 5,400 RPM, it had the muscle and stamina for any job. Cast iron block, hydraulic lifters, and the kind of overbuilt internals that laughed at neglect. You get the feeling the engineers at Ford didn't mean to make it that tough. Unless, of course, they were secretly designing engines to survive Arctic ice-breaking duty. Because this thing didn't just run, it endured for decades. One fan summed it up perfectly. My 66 F100 runs every single day with nothing more than basic maintenance, and it still fires up instantly. No rebuilds, no fuss. Just the kind of engine that isn't remembered with fireworks, but with pure respect. Mopar 360 V8. The Mopar 360 wasn't the loudest engine on the block, but it sure was the one still idling when others had already tapped out. Introduced as part of Chrysler's LA series, this 5.9-liter small block became the backbone of Dodge trucks, vans, and even cop cars throughout the 70s, 80s, and beyond. It didn't need fanfare. It just needed oil changes and a reason to work. With a 4.00-inch bore and 3.58-inch stroke, the 360 struck a sweet spot between power and durability. Factory horsepower varied from 175 to 245, depending on carb cam and year. But the real draw was its toughness. A cast iron block, hydraulic lifters, and wide parts compatibility made it the go-to for fleet mechanics and DIY warriors alike. If the 318 was the loyal dog of the Mopar stable, the 360 was the mutt that bit harder, hauled longer, and didn't complain in the summer heat or winter freeze. One fan summed it up perfectly. It ran for decades without ever opening the block. That's not marketing hype. That's the kind of legend you hear in southern junkyards and backroad garages. Some say the engineers overbuilt it by accident. We say they just got it right. Ford 4.6 Modular V8. When Ford rolled out the 4.6 Modular V8 in the early 1990s, most folks didn't think it would go down in history. But that's the thing about legends. They usually start quiet. Designed as a new generation replacement for the venerable 5.0 Windsor. This engine found its home in Crown Victorias, F-150s Mustangs, and even police interceptors that idled all day and chased trouble by night. Its secret: precision engineering, tight tolerances, and a chain-driven overhead cam setup that didn't care if the odometer rolled past 6 digits, then 7. We're talking about engines with over 1 million miles on the clock that never had the heads pulled. No rebuilds, No drama? Just oil changes and occasional spark plugs. Compression sat right at 9.0 to 1, and with red lines stretching up to 6,000 RPM in some trims, it balanced longevity and modern performance. One fan put it simply, heard of one that went 1,000,000 miles, and they never even cracked the engine open. It didn't have the raw grunt of a 460 big block, but what it lacked in fury, it made up for with unkillable discipline. In junkyards across Florida, Arizona, and the Carolinas, you'll still find these mills starting on the first crank, sounding like they're ready for another 100,000. It may have been built for the new era, but it earned its stripes the old-school way by refusing to die. So maybe these engines didn't make headlines. They weren't built to impress showroom visitors. They were built to survive. Out in the fields, deep in the back roads, hauling wood, pulling stumps, or just getting to work in the middle of winter. These weren't just power plants. They were part of the family. Ask any real gearhead, and they'll tell you. Bulletproof isn't about horsepower, it's about heart. It's the Ford 300 that cranks every time. The 22R that shrugs off broken belts. The Slant 6 that refuses to die just to prove a point. Now it's your turn. Got a motor that's outlasted 3 owners and a divorce. We want to hear it. Drop your story in the comments, and if we missed a legend, tell us what deserves to be in part 2. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still turns wrenches on the weekends. We're not just telling stories. We're keeping the engines alive.